response, Rockaway does, Garibaldi does, and Netarts does. But yes, we go out immediately. Our average response and on-scene time is just under 6 minutes. So people are getting care. They're just not getting that definitive treatment and transport and treatment at the hospital in a timely manner. But they are getting care quickly.
Yeah, in the 30 years I've been down here, we've always had one ambulance in North County, and we still have one ambulance in North County. And I had the pleasure of having to make a 911 call a few months ago, and your guys showed up in minutes, and they were taking care of me. And they said, the good news is we're here to help you, but the bad news is the ambulance isn't going to be here for 30 minutes.
Right. That one ambulance in North County is the first one to get shut down if they have a staffing issue. So right now, I'd say that ambulance is actually being staffed. Oh, I don't want to throw out any definitive numbers, but I'd say it's probably less than half the time right now.
Wow.
Really?
Is there anything the city can do to support the further negotiations with you and Adventist? Anything that will help?
Honestly, I think at this point, now that the issue has become quite public, I think that's really what they needed. So it is now on the front burner, and they're looking at it very hard.
Okay.
So for now, I think that's enough. And I thank you for those calls. So.
Well, let us know, because we really do want to support you, Chris, for sure.
Chief, I had one quick question, and that is whether going forward, are you looking at more of a tiered response? Are you, as I understand it right now, you get an ambulance on pretty much every EMS, whether it's ALS or BLS or whatever it is, and whether you can move more towards a tiered response to keep the ALS available more often. And I don't know about Oregon law about requiring ambulances to be ALS and all that, but it just seems to me in a rural area like this where ALS services are not very available, as if we could figure out a system to allow the ALS to just be prioritized and send BLS on, which is, I would imagine, 75% of your calls.
I don't disagree with that. In fact, the ASA as it stands right now requires 2 paramedics on the ambulance. And that was one of the things I said is, if you're having such a difficult time finding paramedics, it can still be 1 paramedic and 1 EMT and still qualify as ALS. And I would not be opposed to having a tiered response either. That does put a large onus on our dispatchers, who are already pretty strapped to make that call on whether it's going to be an ALS or BLS response. But we can certainly talk about that at our next meeting, because it's a good idea.
Well, the protocols for dispatchers have been refined by so many people that I think you would find that it's already out there and available, and they just follow a checklist essentially to identify. Anyway, I just was curious whether that's one of the items that you're thinking about for the future.
I was hesitant to go as far as a BLS ambulance, but I thought it was a pretty big concession to say, well, we only need 1 paramedic. Of course, that's easy for me to say because I am a paramedic. So,
well, the truth is that I'm sure you probably will attest that the vast majority of your transports could be BLS. Absolutely. And don't require an ALS level of service. And you hate to see an ALS unit go to Tillamook or go to Seaside when a BLS unit could have transported them. So
right, I agree wholeheartedly. One of the other issues is they do a whole lot of interfacility transports between Tillamook Hospital up over into Portland. That takes an ambulance out of the area for at least 4 hours. So we've asked that they consider either a BLS unit or even a transport van for some of those calls to keep the ambulances where they belong for emergency medicine.
This has been very informative. We're going way over our time here. Is there any questions from the public? We got 22 people on the call here this afternoon.
We've got no hands raised. No.
Okay. So Chris, we have you on the agenda tonight. Are you joining us tonight too for a little bit?
I am. It'll be essentially a repeat.
Okay, we're going to have to condense this a little bit because we've spent pretty much an hour talking here. Can we condense that down to 5 to 10 minutes, hopefully?
I'll do my best. I'll talk faster. I'll clean it up.
You give us some of the slides are great. I think if you just kind of summarize on the slides, and we'll take a few questions, but I'm going to have to control the time a little better this evening, or we'll never get through our agenda.
Not a problem.
And I appreciate you taking the time to do a double shift, and you're not even in town. Well, anybody got anything else for Chris, or we'll see him tonight?
Well, I just have one thing to say, and it's been true of the fire department since its inception. It is a huge gift to our community. The comments that we get from our neighbors and friends when you show up, you have a professional team that really cares about the residents, knows most of the residents when they show up, and just does an incredibly professional job. And it's made a huge difference having a regional response and having the level of training and commitment that your volunteers have. We're just very, very lucky to have you, and we really appreciate all you do, you and your team, Chris. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. It's our honor, believe me.
Well, thanks again, and we'll see you tonight at 6.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll see you then.
All right, thanks, Chief. Layla, we're running a little behind, but I think you're next, and we're going to talk about the disposition of the old City Hall building on Manzanita.
Yeah, I know. I love the focus on time. This is great, but I think we're doing pretty good. Thank you. So I wanted to pick up on the conversation we started having last time. We had just gotten the appraisal. We started diving into a conversation about kind of what the disposition process, so how do we sell the property at 543 Lanita. So I wanted to have a discussion at the work session with you all, answer any questions, kind of try to get through the details on that. And my hope was at the regular session meeting, y'all would feel comfortable enough to make a motion to choose a method so that I can cut loose on getting the property up for sale. So just to kind of remind folks, I did sort of outline just briefly a staff report, but they're kind of two different methods we had talked about last time. One is a bid method, and then one is traditional broker. The bid method is something I've done in the past. Before, it was because it was required. The city I worked for previously required a bid process for disposition of property. We don't have those same requirements. So it's really kind of our call. And I've checked with the city attorney, and we're allowed to do either. So there's no legal reason to do one or the other. A bid process basically is what it sounds like. We kind of put the property up for bid. We place a minimum sale value. We accept sealed bids. We do all the marketing, all the outreach, all the advertising, we being me. So we're doing all that. And then we get bids. We set a date. We accept those bids. If we get one that meets the mark, then we advance with that bid. If we get several that meet the mark, then likely we would go through a process with council to select somebody. And then we would go through the sale process. Then I would still have to hire a broker to help with that, because there's just a lot of the transactional details that you want somebody who's a professional doing that. Right. So getting through title and closing and all of that. So there would still be a cost associated with that. And then the other option is just hiring a broker, getting that person to use their professional expertise to do the deal. They handle pretty much everything, and then they take a commission. So if we did a bid, we'd have to pay a broker kind of by the hour up front. I'd probably need to get a contract with somebody. Through a brokerage process, we just select a broker, and then they get paid out of the commission. So we would have an agreement with that broker as well. So either one requires an agreement, but the payment gets done differently. So that's kind of high level overview. There's some experts here on our city council that might have some other other information to offer, but I wanted this to just be an open conversation with the council. And if there's any questions I could answer about the process, I could tell you my preference is to hire a broker. for just I think having someone who's professional, who knows how to market these kinds of properties would be beneficial, in addition to just the time savings for myself. But I do think that would probably get us the best price and probably the quickest sale. But again, that's just my opinion, and welcome hearing what y'all have to say about this.
Well, I'm no expert on this, but my gut feeling is that the bid process in a small town like this on the Oregon coast is different than doing a bid process in a larger municipality in the valley, is kind of what I think. And I want to hear what Hans has to say.
Yeah, me too.
Well, my main reservation about doing the bid process is the expense upfront, the professional fees involved, and perhaps to no avail and with no result. And I know myself personally that commissions are a terrific motivator to produce and perform. My compensation is a 100% commission. I don't get a paycheck from anybody. So I think that a local broker with commercial experience will be very driven and engaged and want to make something happen. And the cost to the city up front is zero.
Hans, how many local brokers with commercial experience will we have to choose from, would you say?
Well, probably not a lot. I mean, I've done, I think, at least 3, maybe 4 commercial transactions this year, and I wouldn't call myself a commercial broker. So there are a couple. They're not in Manzanita, but they're nearby enough that they would certainly be comfortable working in this market. So I think that we would have a couple of options, and given that at least for now, demand has been pretty strong, even on the commercial side, I think that we would have a certain amount of leverage for some pretty decent commission pricing. I mean, back in the day, commercial commission would be at least 6%, and I think that could be negotiated down a fair amount from that point.
So for a lot of reasons, I think I would favor the broker approach. But I'm curious, is it likely we're going to have a broker come on and, or should we expect the broker to question the appraisal? The broker's not going to want to sell a property that's overvalued if it is overvalued. We don't know that, but there was some concern when we talked about the number last month. Should we expect the broker to come in and tell us where we really belong?
Well, I think they'll have an opinion, certainly, but generally, if an appraisal is done in a professional manner, brokers enjoy having that as a resource to point to value. And I don't disagree with any of the rationale used in that appraisal. The most important element of that appraisal that I'm inclined to follow is that it talks a lot about market time and market exposure. And that appraisal is really based on a technique that isn't exactly the bid process. And I think that to get towards that 800,000, 775, whatever it ends up being, I think it's going to take some time, some market time for some nuancing, some conversations. People are going to scratch their heads. And, as Mike said, this is a different market. It's both by process, it's a little bit different given the nature of the size of our communities and location, but the buyer is also different because there is not a lot of money in developing commercial property at the coast. The land values are very high, the construction costs are high, and the rents are average comparatively to the costs. So I think having time on market and time for people to kind of think about things and scratch their head, I think that'll help. And I don't think the appraisal is way off. It's a bit on the high side, but generally you'd want a list price to be a bit on the high side.
And it's important too to remember about the appraisal, and a good broker will help us set a good price, is that it did assume that it was a vacant lot. And so there's some kind of residual costs associated with that would affect the price. And so that's the nice thing about having a broker, is that they do bring a professional opinion, will evaluate that and help guide us to a good price, I think.
I have a question, I guess, and that is, I also agree that a broker approach seems the most appropriate. But the one reason I think about it being good for us is, and I'll ask the question, if we go to a bid process, are we not more or less obligated to take the highest bid for the property? I realize there's some flexibility, but for the most part, we're taking the highest bid. If we go to a broker, do we have more latitude in accepting a negotiated offer? And the reason I ask that, if we have two competing parties, not likely, but potentially because of the market, looking at that piece of property, and one wants to build a discotheque and one wants to build a library or something, I don't, do we have the flexibility to kind of manage how that property turns out? And so that was the one thing I was thinking about, is that we have more control over how that property is sold, essentially.
I think we would. No, with a broker process, I think we would have much more flexibility, latitude.
Yeah, I would agree with that too, for the reasons that you stated, Councilor Nuttall. I think that, if we would just have more flexibility negotiation, whereas a bid, a sealed bid, you get it in a piece of paper, and that's what it is. And the last process I worked on, just for background, we were super lucky because we got the asking price for the bid that we wanted for the use that we wanted, but the follow-up bids weren't that far behind, and they were not great uses. And so it really highlighted to me an issue in the process, is that had we not gotten that other bid that was what we wanted, we would have been kind of stuck with a bid for something that we weren't actually super excited about.
Well, you said it much more eloquently than I was able to ask the question, but yes.
One thing I would like us to consider, I think we can certainly make a decision on how to go about disposing of this piece of property. Sounds like, from what Hans is saying, we're not going to, probably not going to flip it in a matter of weeks. It's going to be a long process. And so during that process, I hope we can find the time to consider other property that we may have, we may be surplusing in the future, so that we can take somewhat of a strategic approach to it. I don't want us to be in a position where we cash in a piece of property when we need some money, without having some kind of a longer term vision and plan for disposing of any property that might be surplus in the future. And so I know, Layla, you mentioned in your memo the possibilities with the old firehouse and the current city hall, temporary city hall. I really appreciate that. And I think a lot of people probably spotted that and saw some rays of hope there about possibilities. There might be excess lots up at Underhill. I think there's some other property that unimproved property that we own, and I think it would just be a good opportunity if we're going to do this, and it's not going to happen fast. We're going to have plenty of time to think about being in the position of being a seller of real estate. It would be a good opportunity for us to take a look down the road and look at all of our holdings and see if there are other opportunities and other plans we may have for those properties.
Well, that's music to my ears when people say strategy and longer term planning. It makes me so excited. So thank you for noting that, Councilor Stegman. And one of the things that I'm working on right now is trying to pull together a comprehensive spatial, like a map of all of the property that we own, so that we actually have a really clear picture of all the property that the city's own. So that's a work in progress, won't be done immediately. But you're right. I think having strategy around how we dispose of property, understanding the extent of properties that we have, is really going to be important. And yeah, it was important to me to mention that because I do think it's important for us to have a nexus and a reason why we're selling stuff, because we don't want to just offload it because we need cash, right? That's not what you're going for. So I think the selling of City Hall, the fund of City Hall, is a solid nexus, but the other properties we do have a lot of opportunity to leverage some pretty amazing public benefit. And so I'll be keeping you folks posted, but that's definitely one of the things that's been on my list, is really trying to understand what our real estate assets are, and getting, we have a lot of stuff on paper and in files, and I'm trying to get it to where we can actually physically see it. What do we own and where is it?
Thank you.
Okay, so tonight we're going to have a public hearing on this first, right, Layla? And I'll open the public hearing and we'll take public comment. And then after we're done with that, we'll close the public hearing, and then we're going to be asked to make a decision on how we want to dispose of this property. There's one of these two methods. It sounds like we're pretty much in consensus on how we want to go forward. So probably have to take a resolution and give Layla instructions on how to go to the next step. Anybody have any other questions on this at this point? No. Okay, so we'll
awesome. Thank you so much.
We'll deal with that tonight. And the last thing we're going to talk about here, I think, today is the visitor center update. So you taking that, Hans, or Layla, you taking that first?
Well, I can take part of it.
Okay.
It's not
Hans,
exactly.
Dan is here too, so
Okay.
just as a heads up.
So my part of this isn't so much specifically the visitor center, but I wanted to give you an update about a very informal meeting that we had of the off-season tourism promotion committee. It was very casual in the sense that there are only 2 standing members of that committee that still are in active terms. My position as chair expired in December of last year, and 2 of the committee members, their terms also expired in December of last year. So COVID has pretty much closed down this off-season tourism committee. But they were all but one member was able to show up, and we had a nice Zoom meeting, and there were some great ideas put forth. I think that there was consensus on the main points that came up. There wasn't much disagreement. There were some, really, unique ideas coming from just about everybody there. I think that there was agreement that at least right now, and maybe for the foreseeable future, there is probably very little need to promote off-season tourism. That we have a lot more people in town than we're used to having in the off-season. And when this committee was envisioned by Mayor Bullard some years ago, it was a different picture in the off-season than it is now. Matt Ruano, the only commercial member of the committee who came, he did make a great point, which is that at some point in time when the events that we used to try to focus on in the off season to bring people here in the off season, we were mostly, encouraging local organizations to have events. And given the couple of years that these events have been shut down by COVID, when those things start to wake up again, and who knows when that will be, there probably will be some need, and some help would probably be very beneficial in kind of promoting and getting these events back as a going concern, because it's an industry and an activity that is pretty much shut down still. But I think I don't think anybody on the committee felt like, yes, let's get back together and let's start promoting off-season tourism. There was none of that energy there. There was also a great suggestion that if there is a similar committee going forward, that the scope should be a little bit wider, and that promoting tourism should also, and I'm glad that Nan is here because I'd like her to speak a little bit to this, because it sounds like the county has much more comfort or familiarity with dealing with the restaurant and hotel lobby. But, things like employee support, workforce housing, transportation costs, just some of the other backstory pieces of the tourism industry. It would be great if there is a committee that they were focused on those aspects, and that this wasn't such a very hyper-focused committee for promoting tourism in the off season, and looking more at destination management than tourism promotion purely. Communication came up by more than one of us, that it was really important to keep communication strong, and the messaging, communication all the way around, communicating with merchants about opportunities, communicating with residents about why the committee, whatever, if there is a committee going forward, why it exists, what its purpose is. And if the county does become, and maybe this will be a segue into talking about the county, but if county becomes involved with a visitor center, I see a potential use for a committee to communicate with the county and make sure that the county is kind of getting our feedback and is aware of what our community concerns are about tourism, and that any involvement they have with the visitor center is oriented towards those kinds of concerns. And a great example of, I mentioned workforce housing and employee support, but another aspect that I hope that Nan can speak to a little bit, we have a great trails need. There's a lot of energy pent up behind trails, and it would be terrific if there is some participation from county with the visitor center. I believe it sounds like one use for off-season, or not off-season, for tourism promotion money would be a trail work, and getting kind of jump-starting that process of the trails committee and trails work. So that's kind of, we had about an hour-long meeting, and I hope I kind of got everybody's ideas in there.
Okay, got anything to add to that, Layla? Or
No, I think it's a really good summary of the discussion. I did want to point out, and as Hans mentioned, I did too, that Nan Devlin's here. And after our last meeting, Nan and I fortuitously had a meeting scheduled the next day. So we got together and talked quite a bit. I learned a lot, so much from Nan. And what came out of that meeting was the county's kind of willingness and offer to potentially assist and help us in a transition time. And so Nan gave me a proposal to look at, no real details yet, but the main thing would be kind of working with us to maintain a visitor center, and then working on what, and maybe she can talk a little bit more about it, but a destination management plan. So that really resonated with me as we talked about tourism and the resources that we have available to us to promote tourism, and what other ways that we could be thinking about it more holistically, because I think that, and probably everyone here would agree, that we don't necessarily need to advertise for people to come here or promote our town. I think people know where we are and where to come. So it's more of managing the impacts to ensure that continued livability for the folks that live here and for the people that come to visit. And so that really resonated with me, this idea of coming up with a destination management plan. And I know she's working on one of those with, I believe, Rockaway and Garibaldi. So that was really appealing to me. And then also kind of working with this, with them to help us kind of understand better at what level and like who's managing the visitor center, so that we can kind of redefine it perhaps through this planning process. So so that was the general tenet of the proposal, is getting the county's support potentially to sort of bridge the gap until we figure out what we want to do with that space. And then in the meantime, we're developing a destination management plan as well, so that it gives us some more structure and strategy to how we're spending those resources and on what. So that would be my hope in the end, is that I can start to work with the county on moving forward with getting a proposal around this.
so, Nan, are you with us today? Someplace
Yes.
hiding on the screen somewhere?
Yes, I'm
Yeah,
here.
and she just got back
There
from
she is.
vacation, so I'm super glad that she's here today. So
So I know I saw some of the things you sent us in writing about what you thought you could do for us. I mean, kind of give us an idea what you're thinking as far as how we could work with your organization to
Sure.
run our visitor center.
So Yeah, we had a meeting with Leila. It was, and I did tell her what we changed to in late 2018. We changed our benchmarks and our whole approach. We took advantage of a brand new tourism board as we became a 501c6 to change from promoting, which I'd been kind of fighting for a while, to destination management. And that's really based on the principles of sustainable tourism, which is about people, place, and profit. And what that really means is tourism benefiting the community, bringing benefits to it, to its people and community? Is it protecting your natural resources and the values that you have for your town? And three, is it empowering economic vitality for your businesses, for especially for workforce and year-round employment? But sustainable tourism is great. All those principles are, kind of highfalutin, but you put it into practice through destination management. And destination management is the city, agencies, maybe land managers, everybody that might be involved in your town public works, because it deals with infrastructure, and the tourism organization. And you decide what you value most, what your assets are, and then you create initiatives to support all those things. And we've done that. We're just doing 11 initiatives that include public safety, community development, business support. We are down to like 2 things, I think, that we promote. And that is the North Coast Food Trail, because it's our agreement with all of our members on the food trail. And we also do outdoor recreation in our new GIS map. But other than that, we aren't advertising. And I think, too, after meeting with several cities, that they're not aware that they can use their TLT for tourism-related facilities. And a trail is considered a tourism-related facility. There is in state law a sentence that says tourism facilities include real property with a lifespan of 10 years. So that can be at least 10 years. So that can be a trail. It can be signage. It can be improvement. Like, for instance, Pine Grove got a grant from the facilities grant from the county to do roof repairs, because that's considered a tourism related facility. So the benefit of doing a community-based destination management plan is that you can plan out long-term expenditures using the TLT. And it does not have to go for promotion. I would say that if we go into a recession, that you would want to promote, especially off-season. You'll want to support your businesses during that time. But events are great examples of what to support. It can be in the visitor center. I sent you, I'll tell you, I send a lot of reasons to keep it open. But really, the 3 main ones are that you have those wonderful beach wheelchairs. You're really leaders in that, in providing that to people with mobility issues. It's a very important thing to keep. And if there is a way to manage that program, whether through a contract with one of the lodging properties down near the beach or whatever, if the city can't do it, I highly encourage you to keep that going. People love maps and visitor guides. Those could be distributed elsewhere besides that building. But one of the main things for keeping a visitor center is the personal connection. The visitor center manager or the volunteers working there, they're local ambassadors, and they are kind of the first line of defense towards visitors, that to make sure that they understand the values that are important to the community. And that's, I think, is in a time that we are trying to prevent over tourism, which I'm sure in August people say, oh my God, there's too many people here. But we don't want that to happen all the time. And there are places around the world that have been dealing with it for a long, long time. So I would recommend starting with the destination management planning process. It takes, and I'll just give you a quick rundown of what it includes. I facilitate these things frequently. I'm doing one, I just did one with Rockaway Beach. I'm doing one with Garibaldi right now, and I'll be doing one with Bay City very soon. And that is kind of a 3 meetings process. The first one, you talk about what is destination management. You set up, you discuss what your values are, what your assets are, and you do a SWOT. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I categorize all that stuff, all those things that people list, and then we go back and we say, okay, given this, given what you value, and given what you believe in, what initiatives do you want to build? And so then we go through initiatives and what each of those initiatives might cover. What are the tasks under each of those initiatives? And then the third is setting benchmarks and saying, what does success look like? And that gives you goals. And like I said, our former benchmarks were, you got to get that TLT up, you got to get more money, you got to get more visitors. And we've changed completely. We call our benchmarks the 3 R's, and that's return on responsibility, return on relationships, and return on investment. And that investment one is, how well are our businesses doing? How are we using the lodging tax to help our businesses? So we do things like workforce training, guest service gold training. I know you mentioned workforce housing as one issue that you might like to use the TLT for, your room tax for. And I know that Manzanita had a lodging tax prior to 2003. So anything that you collected prior to 2003 usually goes into your city budget. You can use that for anything. Now, you were able to keep that percentage even after the 2003 law that required a 70-30 split. 30% goes to the budget, 70% tourism facilities and or promotion. So you should have a fairly big budget to use for tourism facilities and some budget that you could work towards housing issues. So it's just something to think about, and it's something that we can offer to do for you. I enjoy those destination management processes. They're really fun, and it's often the values that you set up are the things that create the initiatives. So it's takes the focus off promotion almost entirely.
Anybody have any questions for Nan?
And in the communities that you've been working with on destination management initiatives, who's been involved with you? What mix of people has been involved in those processes?
What makes them get involved? Well, usually
no, I'm sorry, not what makes it. What does a typical mix include? Is it all business people? Is it business people, community members?
It's a huge mix. We have people from, like, for instance, in Garibaldi, which I have a second meeting next week, it was people from the nonprofits, the port, businesses, the city. It was a huge mix. Yeah. Recreational fishers, commercial fishers were there, city council members were there. Lots of input.
I guess the question is, do we want to go through this process and kind of define what we're doing before we try to open the visitor center again, or so that we have a plan? Or it kind of sounds like that's the direction we're trying to go, right?
Well, I think it's worth looking, more seriously and more in depth at the proposal that Nan put forward about. I hopefully there's a bit of an incremental process that can happen here, And maybe step one is just kind of trying to get the doors back open to the visitor center and get it operated, and then figure out how much energy and what timing we want to put behind what is a radical but probably important shift in using these TLT funds towards managing the community and not promoting trying to get more bodies to come here.
Mm-hmm. And that's true. Even Travel Oregon hasn't shifted there yet, but more and more communities are needing it. And I know why Travel Oregon isn't doing it yet is because they depend so heavily on the city of Portland, Eugene, places like that are really suffering for room tax and getting visitors back. It's really bad. We are very, very fortunate here on the coast to be able to have had visitors who stayed and spent their money and helped our restaurants and our businesses and our lodging stay open. It's been a gift, even though I know in August it doesn't sound like that. It doesn't feel like that. But we're very, very lucky. We could be in a situation like Portland and we'd have so many closures of our businesses. I think Portland, the last report I heard, 38% of their restaurant businesses closed permanently. And we have had 2 restaurants in the entire county close. So we're doing very, very well. And then, like I said, until a recession hits, we take advantage of the wealth of lodging tax that has come in and put it to community use.
Well, on the short term, what should we do about the visitor center? Just go out and hire somebody and try to get some visitors to just sit there and pass out brochures, or do we want to be more creative than that?
Well, I think you could be really more creative in that. And I will tell you, I think you had a model for a business or for a visitor center mostly because you had Dan and his great group of volunteers. But visitor centers are closing throughout the state. Lane County shut their main one down that was on I-5. They shut it down. Salem shut down their city center visitor center. Portland shut all their visitor centers. And the reason is really that people are using their phones. Now, the people love maps. I know that when they come to town, they look for maps. That's the number one thing they look for. And we, of course, put out a countywide visitor guide, which we are going to have to reprint here pretty quickly. We had 55,000 printed, and they're almost gone from mail-in requests and online requests. It's kind of amazing. But you can have those maps and those visitor guides at businesses around town. So it wouldn't be, visitor center isn't the only place to get those.
So one of the things that I really appreciated about Dan and what he did, and I really don't want to lose, if possible, is that Dan was really a glue. I mean, actually, I would say, and then Dan should respond to this. There's a little bit of time spent with visitors, a little bit of time spent with businesses, a little bit of time with the community. I mean, he just kind of was able to pull all of that together, and I think that's really important. I mean, if any one of us had a question about visitors or events or things that were happening, the first person I'd call would be Dan.
Absolutely.
Because he knew what was going on.
Yes.
And so I would hate to see us shut that down.
Mm-hmm.
I also think if we could find the right person that, and set up kind of a job description that would encompass that, then we could start to plan and to do the kind of destination research and what do we want to do, and how for us, I would bet that trails are going to surface as something that's very important. But again, Dan's input on those things was just critical, and I just would hate to lose that resource and shut the door.
Yeah, I agree with you. He was the source of information, the source of connection. he acted like kind of like a one-person chamber of
Oh, he
commerce.
was.
You know? And and that's really valuable because, like you just said, if you had a question, you just called Dan because he had his, finger on the livelihood of the town, and not just Manzanita, also Nehalem and Wheeler. He knew what's going on. So, yeah, I know, and I hired him away.
I was just going to jump into that.
We may never forgive you, Nan.
I know.
I was going to say, why don't you just give him back to us?
Yeah.
I'll
I
make
just-
it up to you somehow.
I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that Dan is still with us. He hasn't died or anything.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no,
It's
he's here.
he's still
here.
with us. In fact, I'm looking forward to hearing his comments, but I'm
Yes.
intrigued by Linda's comment that suggests using and I won't use the word volunteer, but some kind of a coordinator at the visitor center, at least in a short-term basis, to help us in the process of destination planning and all the other things. It seems like we have within our community the kind of people that could handle that nicely. Maybe not to the level of Dan, obviously, but they could do a lot of good things for us, and that would be the place that we maybe should focus first, getting that position, and then using that position to catapult us into the destination planning, infrastructure planning, use of the TLT monies. But I am looking forward to hearing from Dan what his thoughts are too.
Hey, everybody. I am still here, as a matter of fact.
Oh,
Thank God.
Same spot, same channel. No, I think, our community is lucky in a way that there's plenty of people. There's a nice pool of community-minded people to choose from who'd probably be interested in, at least a scaled-back version to begin with, perhaps. And I know from experience that plenty of our volunteers are still interested in coming out and helping out. So there's a good beginning base there. I did provide a list of duties I'd done over the few years to the committee. And, a lot of it was just, as I've said before, making it up as I went along, because especially in the last 18 months, bouncing back from crisis to crisis. But there's a really good list of things and duties to work from there, and ways to accomplish that. And like you said, you could pare it down and perhaps have more creative use of TLT funds to kind of winnow away what you want and what you don't want. But as far as I would agree with what's been said so far, as far as looking ahead for destination management. I think it's probably, regardless of what had happened with the visitor center, I think it's time had probably come to maybe look more deeply into something like that.
Mm-hmm.
so Nan and Dan, would you be willing to help us find the right person to maybe run that on a smaller scale, possibly, than Dan Haig was running it? Do you have any names in mind, Dan, of people in the community that might be willing to take on a part-time position down there and work to rebuild that volunteer organization again, as if we ever get out of COVID?
I've had people reach out to me, and I've just kind of been putting them on hold because I wasn't sure where it was going. But I do have some names I can pass on or recommend, and I can definitely pass on my list of volunteers if anybody wants to reach out and contact them as well. And as far as searching and advising, I'm definitely open to helping. That 100%.
And we can help. Both Dan and I can help train. We can do guest service gold training with them and with volunteers. I think the city of Manzanita took part in that a couple of years ago, right before COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, and I think the relationship with the county, I think we've not taken advantage of that in the past. And I think this is particularly with Dan there, because he knows us so well. I think utilizing your resources and your experience is going to be really useful as we transition to that next step.
Yeah, glad to help.
I just want to suggest, so that I think, if I understand the concept of destination management, I think that if we do a good job exploring that approach and committing to that approach, that's going to drive, I would think, the job description of the visitor center director to a significant extent. And so if we hire someone on the front end as an interim step or a part-time basis to open up the center, that's one thing. But I do think I do think that the next Dan is going to have a job that is driven largely by the concept, which we don't have yet. We haven't created it yet. So I would just caution a little bit about, hire first, plan second. It may be that you're talking about hiring on an interim or part-time basis just to open the doors. But ultimately that position that Dan had will be different because we're going to have a different approach. And I just think we probably need to get the concept down before we commit to a full-time position. Or I guess it was never a full-time position. But
Well, it's not a full-time, and it's also an independent contractor at this point, and that may also be something we want to look at. I think it is an interim position to kind of get us through this process, and ultimately maybe the person, but I don't think that. I think that's setting it up as an interim position and transitionary position is the way to do it. I would agree with you, Jerry. Once we get our plan together, it may require a very different skill set.
Right.
Well, how do people feel? Do they feel it's critical that we get the visitors center open again sooner than later, or not?
When I was mentioning getting someone in the position, and I was thinking interim as well, but I was thinking using that position not only to get it open, but to have a focal point for this dialogue that goes on in the community regarding how, because I don't think our existing staff, and Layla would have to answer this, but I don't think our existing staff has the capacity really to get involved in yet another initiative. So what I'm thinking is we get someone, yes, I realize we're opening that up before we're going through the planning process. I'm thinking of using that person to help us get through the planning process. And I think we have the capacity in our community to have someone that could achieve that. Right. And the other thing that I was intrigued by Nan's comment is that we have to be nimble here, because if we have an economic change, a movement downward, for example, or she called it a recession, I won't use the R word, but if we were to move around and have a different perspective, then we have to be nimble. We can't continue to go down a path as if everything is, terrific. So whoever we put in that position and whatever plan we end up with, it's going to have to be pretty broad in its scope. So my recommendation, and what I would encourage, is securing someone with Dan's help that he has knowledge of to get into that position, get the place open up, get the volunteers active again so that we don't lose them. And also to use that person as a focal point for going through Nan's prescribed process of destination planning.
Everybody feel
I think that's a great idea. I think that
love it
is pretty consistent with what we were talking about. And I think that's the advantage of having that relationship with Dan in the county, is that we're not really starting from scratch. We really have some wisdom and some ideas already, and it will make it an easier transition.
Yeah, just my 2 cents is I would agree. I think an interim is the right move at this stage for all the reasons that y'all have mentioned already. And then doing the plan, and then that sets the stage for what the kind of the permanent position is. Because I agree, it may look a little different, but I think that that's a really neat way to go forward.
Yeah, I just have to reflect back I think it was to Steve's point. I mean, I've been active and part of this process for probably the last 10 years. And when we started it, we were in recession. I mean, we were struggling to get people here. And by the time we got the short-term rental tax passed, we were beginning to see the resurrection of people coming back. And then it just kind of went off the deep end. So those changes are going to be happening, and being nimble and able to respond to those changes, I think, is a critical component of this.
And I would say too that any plan I always consider it a live document.
Right.
You absolutely have to adapt. And I know people used to do 10-year plans, 20-year plans. It's just that
If you're
doesn't,
updating them every year, it's okay.
That's right. That's right.
you know, our world can be really different just in
Right.
5 years. So you really do have to make it a live document.
So, Layla, are we kind of giving you a framework to work on here, do you think, or
Yeah, I don't
how do
see
you
that
feel
Dan
about
has
this?
run away, so I feel like we got a good path.
Well, hopefully, maybe he can point you in the right direction to contact somebody. Maybe there's somebody down that's retired that wants to put in some hours and run that visitor center for us for a while.
I don't know.
Sounds like he's got some names.
Well, I will reach out. This is, I think, a good example of when you tap the experts to help you do something that's going to be really successful. So I feel like what we've laid out here is going to lead us to success in a way that's really inclusive of our community too, which is kind of top of line, I think, for all of us here. So I like the approach. Yeah.
Okay. Well, sounds like we got a rough working idea plan to do what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Speaking of trails and tourist promotion, I don't know if you guys all heard, but we got the annual achievement award from the recreational trails program on our Neocani Mountain to Manzanita Trail along 101. And Connie Soper, who spent years working on that project, we went up and did a video on the trail last week, which is they're having their annual awards banquet on November 10th. And of course, it's going to be virtual. So we'll probably post that video and that information on the city's Facebook page and stuff when they put that together. But if you haven't been up there, that we walked a little bit of the trail. It really came out nice. And it's a great addition to keep people off of 101, which has been, I've walked down 101 coming off the south end of Neocani Mountain to get home before. And that was treacherous when you had to walk on the highway. Anyway, that was kind of cool. So.
Yeah. We'll try to show that at the next meeting. Since the awards isn't until the 10th, we'll hold off, maybe show it in December.
It's only going to be 3 minutes long, so I suppose we could show that at a council meeting or something.
Yeah, I stuck it on the list just in case.
Okay. Do we get everything resolved here this afternoon? Anybody got anything else? We got anything else treacherous to deal with tonight? I don't think so.
I don't think so. We do have this update for the visitor center on the agenda. It's at the end of the night. Nan, I don't know, unless the council disagrees, that you and Dan need to be there necessarily. Would hate to have you have to spend another, I know you'd love to, but another 4 hours with us. So I think we can probably cover what we need to tonight. But thank you so much for showing up, especially after I don't want to highlight that you just got back from vacation, but she just got back from vacation and she showed up for us today. So
we appreciate
really
that.
Awesome.
So I think tonight you could just give a summary of what we discussed here this afternoon, kind of the roadmap of what we're going to go on.
Yeah, well, maybe Hans, you can give the summary of what you talked to the committee about, and I'll go ahead and give the update. So.
Yep, happy to.
Okay.
Thank you. Awesome.
All righty. Has anybody got it? It's about 4:45 and we're meeting at 6 o'clock. You got just time for dinner. So has anybody got anything else before we adjourn? Okay, we'll stand adjourned till tonight. Thank you.
See you then.
Yeah.